More than 50 years ago, a simple idea inspired by the works of one of France's greatest novelists would be born in the form of a manga. I'm of course talking about Lupin III, a series that spans multiple manga series, 5 main TV series, a pilot movie, and a bunch of movies and specials. Today, we're gonna be going back in time, all the way to the beginning, and we're gonna break down the history of Lupin III, from past to present. The whole story of the gentleman thief Lupin III starts back in 1965 with a man named Kazuhiko Kato, or as we best know him, Monkey Punch. He was born in Hamanaka in Hokkaido in 1937. Kato had an interest in drawing from an early age, but didn't start making manga until he was in junior high school, where he would make manga strips for the school newspaper. He would later move to Tokyo in order to find work, and went to a technical school for electronics, but he would still draw for fun in doujinshi groups with other artists. It was then that he was recruited by publishing company Futabasha to make manga for them. More specifically, he would be tasked with creating 4-koma. Kato would work as an assistant to Naoki Tsuji on works such as Serosen Hayato and Tiger Mask. And in 1965, he would debut with his own work, Playboy School, while writing under the pen name Eiji Gamuta. When Futabasha decided to start a weekly magazine in the 60s, they asked Kato to create a series for it. This would be the start of Lupin III. The premise of the manga was that it was going to be a predominantly episodic story, where each chapter was going to focus on the crimes of Lupin and his gang. The chapters would go through Lupin's heists as he announced his intention to steal something by sending a calling card, and then stealing it using his and his group's special set of skills. And from August 10th, 1967, the manga would start its weekly publishing and run for 94 chapters. Kato was also asked to change his pen name to something else for the release of this work, and his boss suggested the name Monkey Punch. Kato didn't actually like this name very much, but since it was suggested by his boss, and since Lupin III was only supposed to be a 3-month project, he decided to accept it. Sadly for him, the project ended up as a success and the name Monkey Punch stuck. And in 1971, additional Lupin III chapters would start releasing. These were known as Lupin III New Adventures, and had a total of 35 extra chapters that came out between 1971 and 72. In 1977, Monkey Punch would start releasing a sequel manga called New Lupin III that would publish in Futabasha's weekly manga action until 1981. In the US, New Lupin III is known as World's Most Wanted, and the series was licensed and published by Tokyopop starting in 2002. However, due to low sales, Tokyopop dropped the manga after Volume 9 of World's Most Wanted. There would also be created more Lupin manga, like Lupin III S, Y, and M, which are all made by different authors and supervised by Monkey Punch. As stated, Monkey Punch was inspired by Maurice Leblanc's Arsène Lupin. He would read 15 of the stories about this gentleman thief before creating his own version with Lupin III. The original plan was to create a comedy adventure series that reflected the traits of this notorious criminal. It was also intended for Monkey Punch's Lupin to have blood ties to Arsène Lupin, given that he is the grandson of the notorious gentleman thief. However, this was supposed to be kept secret. But Monkey Punch was convinced to make this blood relation known to the readers. This would eventually turn into a bit of a copyright issue for Monkey Punch. The reason for this is that he never actually asked for permission to use the name Lupin. So with the increasing popularity of Lupin III, the LeBlanc estate decided to pursue legal action in Japan for copyright infringement. Because of this, Monkey Punch was required to change the name of the titular character. The names used for Lupin was either the Japanese pronunciation Rupan or the English name Wolf. In French, the name was changed to Edgar de la Cambriole, which translates to Edgar of Burglary. This would remain all the way up until 2021, where the name Lupin entered the public domain and was considered common use, and it could not be deemed as copyright infringement to simply use a similar name. Because of this, Monkey Punch would restore the name of the manga and anime to Lupin III. Now, it is worth noting that Arsène Lupin was not the only source of inspiration for the characters of the Lupin III manga. Monkey Punch was inspired by the godfather of manga, Osamu Tezuka, to become a manga artist in the first place, as well as Mad magazine artist Mort Drucker, who inspired his style. He was also very much inspired by the work of Ian Fleming, and particularly James Bond. And it was because of this inspiration that he decided to give Lupin a mix of traits from his namesake, while also incorporating elements from James Bond, such as his carefree personality. The Bond inspiration would also bleed into the character of Fujiko Mine, who would serve as a Bond girl in the Lupin manga. Typically a love interest or adversary, usually attractive and sexual by nature. although originally Fujiko was not a singular character, but simply the name tacked on to a bunch of female characters that Lupin would run into over the course of his adventures. But these girls would later turn into the singular female character of Fujiko Mine. The reason being that Monkey Punch got tired of making different female characters all the time, so he just made them into a singular character who likes changing her style often. Her name as well is very Bond Girl inspired. Bond girls would often have an attractive or a double entendre as a name, so Monkey Punch decided to name Fujiko after the most attractive thing he knew, Mount Fuji. He also added the co-female suffix to her first name and gave her the family name of Mine, which means summit. Other inspirations for Lupin were the American crime drama Columbo and the novels of Agatha Christie, which both inspired the puzzles and mysteries of Lupin. He was also a fan of the Three Musketeers and likened the relationship of Lupin and Fujiko to that of D'Artagnan and Milady the Winter, saying that they are neither lovers nor husband and wife. They are merely a man and a woman having fun together. Other characters that would make up the Lupin gang are Jigen Daisuke and Ishikawa Goemon XIII. Jigen as a character was very much inspired by James Coburn's character Britt the Knife Expert from the 1960s western movie The Magnificent Seven. Goemon, on the other hand, was made as a more direct reference to the legendary outlaw hero Ishikawa Goemon, basically the Japanese Robin Hood. They also named him Ishikawa Goemon XIII, making him a descendant of the legend. Lastly, we also have to mention Lupin's arch nemesis. No, I don't mean Sherlock Holmes, at least not yet. I'm talking about Inspector Senigata Heiji VII, a police officer who works for Interpol and is tasked with capturing Lupin. His character is based on the famous fictional Japanese detective Senigata Heiji, and I'm sure you're noticing the pattern. The dynamic between Lupin and Senigata is very much inspired by the cartoon Tom and Jerry, showcased by the cat and mouse game that Senigata's chase to capture Lupin often turns out like. And because of this dynamic, neither character ever truly wins or loses. They simply meet again for another dance. The first Lupin anime would come out in 1969 in the form of a 12-minute long Cinemascope Pilot film. A Cinemascope film is a technique where you use an anamorphic lens to shoot a widescreen picture of standard 35mm film or media which is natively in a non-widescreen aspect ratio. This technique was popularly used between 1953 and 1967 in order to produce films that could be screened in theaters. This pilot was produced by Tokyo Movie, now known as TMS Entertainment, and was directed by Masaki Osumi. The idea of adapting Monkey Punch's manga into an anime was first suggested by animator Gisaburo Sugi, who you might be familiar with as the director of the teen drama baseball series Touch from the 80s. He first pitched the idea to Tokyo Movie founder Yutaka Fujioka, who showed an interest in the project. However, due to a lack of financial resources, Tokyo Movie wouldn't be able to make a Lupin series on their own. So therefore they made a pilot movie in order to generate interest and attract potential investors to the project. So the way the pilot works is that it's loosely based on the manga chapter Camera Tricks. What that means in this case is that the film starts out with narration from the 5 main cast of characters, namely Lupin, Jigen, Goemon, Fujiko, and Senigata. They also introduce a retired detective called Kogoro Akechi. The actual story of the film sees our main group of Lupin, Jigen, and Fujiko trapped in a mansion, surrounded by police led by Inspector Senigata and Akechi. Goemon offers to assist the police by going in and killing Lupin, but Lupin has already escaped, disguised as Akechi, and is now helping Jigen and Fujiko escape. A year after the Cinemascope pilot was released, Tokyo Movie still hadn't been able to secure enough funding for the project. This was most likely a result of the fact that Lupin had pretty strong adult and sexual themes. At the time, it was more common for anime to be a bit more lighthearted and happy, and not so geared towards adults. The reason being that watching TV was seen as a family event, so the content would usually also have to be suitable for the whole family. In order to try and secure more funding, they decided to adapt the Cinemascope pilot for TV. The TV version would be largely the same as the Cinemascope version, however, most of the cast would be changed. I will get more into this in a little bit. Adapting the pilot for TV would prove to be worth it, as in 1971, the Kansai region flagship station Yomiuri TV, or YTV for short, would agree to produce a TV adaptation of the Lupin III manga. And so the production for Lupin III Part 1 was underway. Now, one thing that we're going to be talking about a lot over the course of the history of Lupin is the voice actors who played the characters. Some of them stayed with the show for the majority of its run, and others were changed out often, so we gotta keep track of who played what roles over the course of the main series. And already with just the pilot, we've had multiple voice actor changes. In the Cinemascope Pilot film, the main cast's VAs were Nachi Nosawa, the voice of Lupin, Kiyoshi Kobayashi, the voice of Jigen, Eiko Masuyama, the voice of Fujiko, Goro Naya, the voice of Goemon, and Shinsuke Chikaishi, the voice of Senigata. While for the TV pilot, that was released a year later, the voices of Lupin, Goemon, and Senigata had been changed to Taichiro Hirokawa, Osamu Kobayashi, and Chikao Otsuka. The voices of Jigen and Fujiko remained the same. In 1971, Yomiuri Television agreed to produce a 26-episode-long TV adaptation of Lupin III. Masaki Osumi initially retained his role as director for the project, while Yasuo Otsuka was responsible for the character designs. However, the initial ratings for the TV series were poor. Due to this, Osumi was asked to make changes to the series in order to make it more appealing to a wider audience. Osumi refused to make the changes and was subsequently fired as director for the project. So Otsuka brought on board two new faces that he knew from their time together at Toei. You may have heard of them before. The replacements were Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata, later of Ghibli fame. They had recently been brought into Tokyo Movie from Toei Animation in order to begin pre-production on an adaptation of the popular Swedish children's novel Pippi Longstockings. Now, despite the changes, the ratings for Part 1 didn't really improve, and the show was eventually cut short at 23 episodes instead of the intended 26. Osumi directed the first 9 episodes of the show, while Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata took over after that. But due to this change, there are no specific directorial credits for episodes 10 and onward. The credits used were simply A Productions team of directors. The disagreement between Osumi and production came from production wanting Osumi to change the appeal of the characters. You see, Osumi's adaptation of Lupin was very faithful to the manga, so the change they wanted to see was to move away from the more adult nature of Lupin and get rid of the apparent apathy that the characters would show, in favor of something with broader appeal. Basically, they wanted to make Lupin more peppy and upbeat, so Osumi's refusal to do so ended up getting him fired. Meanwhile, Miyazaki and Takahata agreed to make changes to the series based on their own interpretation of the source material. The changes they made were to make the characters more positive, Lupin became more happy-go-lucky and upbeat, while Jigen became more cheery and friendly. Fujiko would have most of her cheap eroticism removed, while Goemon became more of an occasional comic relief. Among fans, Part 1 is known as the Green Jacket series due to the fact that Lupin wears a green jacket during the show. The reason why this matters is because the color of Lupin's jacket will also indicate what kind of Lupin series it is, but you'll see more of that later. At this point, the jacket color doesn't really matter that much. It also has a very big style clash, since it refers to both Osumi's darker and more adult style, as well as Hayao Miyazaki and Takahata's more family-friendly style. Now, there are two conflicting stories behind why Lupin wears a green jacket in the first series. The first was that it was chosen by Otsuka because TVs in Japan at the time had problems with red colors bleeding out on the screen. This is the reason that Monkey Punch himself was given for the change from his original red jacket. But the other reason was, according to director Osumi, that Otsuka felt that Lupin, who is a thief by profession, should not wear clothes that stood out too much, and therefore opted to change the color from red to green. Lupin can also be seen wearing the green jacket in the Castle of Cagliostro, the Fuma Conspiracy, The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, as well as the most recent Part 6. Now, the thing with Part 1 that is quite different from the later series is that it's a bit darker than a lot of the main series that comes later. The characters also act very differently than what we've gotten used to over the years. Lupin, for example, is quite a bit creepier in this one, being very aggressive with women, for example. He's also a lot more cunning than normal. This does kind of go away a little after Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata takes over from Osumi as director of the show, but all in all, the show is a very cool introduction to Lupin and is the most true to the original manga out of any of the adaptations. It's also episodic, as it takes us through different heists and enemies that Lupin has to deal with. The music for this series was composed by Takeo Yamashita, with many of the songs being performed by jazz musician Charlie Kosei, whose birth name was Shu Guangxing. He has, among other things, performed the opening theme for the series Mononoke. The music for this show is quite different to the rest of the series, but already here we see that jazz is very important to this series. The iconic Lupin theme had still not been written, and instead we got a more repetitive music piece where the entire song is pretty much just Charlie Kosei repeating Lupin's name over and over to some music. The ending was also performed by Kosei and is a more melancholic jazz piece. Quite cool actually, and it would be covered and used again as the ending to Lupin 0 from 2022. Alright, let's get back to the voice cast situation for Lupin, because there were some massive changes made to the cast for the TV series. For example, the only returning voice actors from the pilot were Kiyoshi Kobayashi as Jigen, Chikao Otsuka, and Goro Naya. However, Otsuka and Naya didn't voice their original characters this time, but instead swapped roles. So Otsuka ended up voicing Goemon, and Naya voiced Senigata. New voice actors were brought in, such as Yasuo Yamada, who would play Lupin, and whose voice would go on to become synonymous with the character. Yukiko Nikaido would go on to replace Eiko Masayama as the voice of Fujiko for Part 1, although Masayama would still be contracted to the project. Now, while Part 1 did not receive good ratings upon its initial release, it would gain more popularity with reruns. Because of this, the series would eventually get a Part 2 in 1977, a whole 5 years after the initial series ended. This time, the series was broadcast on Nippon TV, where it aired until 1980 and released 155 episodes over its runtime, making it the longest airing single season of Lupin. It would also continue in the style that was introduced after Osumi left the production, meaning that this series was more lighthearted and used more exaggerated animation. However, this time, the project would be spearheaded by multiple episode directors and co-directed by Nobuo Ishiguro. Seijun Suzuki would also work as chief director or supervisor for the project from 1978 until 1980. Once again, Hayao Miyazaki would be brought back to write and direct a few episodes using pseudonyms like Tsutomu Teruki and Terekomu. He was responsible for directing episodes 145 and 155. This would, however, be his final involvement with the Lupin franchise. By Western Lupin fans, this series is often referred to as the Red Jacket series. The Red Jacket often signifies that the show is going to be more like the manga, since that is where the Red Jacket originally comes from. But it has also been used in multiple films and specials, such as The Mystery of Mamo, Operation Return the Treasure, and Blood Seal Eternal Mermaid. So the thing with Part 2 is that it's quite long. But not just long, it's more or less entirely episodic as well. This can make it feel like a bit of a slog to get through at times, especially if you're trying to watch every episode. But the good thing about it is that you can pretty much just throw on any random episode whenever you feel like watching some Lupin. There isn't much to miss out on, and the things you need to know are almost always presented to you in the episode you're watching. But the episodes you should definitely watch from this one, if you haven't already, are episodes 145 and 155, both episodes by Hayao Miyazaki. Even if I didn't tell you that they were done by him, I'm sure you could feel it when watching them, because they really feel like Miyazaki works, and they are definitely some of the best episodes that Part 2 has to offer. Another fun fact about Part 2 is that episode 99 of this series is actually the first time a TV anime episode is broadcast with stereo sound in Japan. Now, one of the most significant things with Part 2 is that an absolute legend joins the project. Starting with Part 2, the music for the series would be composed by jazz musician Yuji Ono. He would eventually become synonymous with Lupin music, as he composed the infamous Lupin theme that would return with pretty much every new Lupin project, performed by different jazz ensembles. So this was the first series that he directly worked on the music that would be one of the most distinguished features of the series, and is the reason why even people who have never watched the series will still recognize it as soon as you put on the Lupin theme. The voice cast for Part 2 would also see changes being made. Notably, Eiko Masayama would return as the voice of Fujiko Mine, after having been replaced for Part 1. Goemon's voice would once again change, as Chikao Otsuka was replaced by Makio Inoue. Other than that, the main cast would remain unchanged. In the mid-80s, a main Lupin series would once again return with Part 3. It aired from 1984 to 1985 and was a total of 50 episodes long. This time, the show would be directed by Yuzo Aoki, who had previous experience working on Lupin as a key animator and storyboard artist. The idea with this third main part was to strike a sort of balance between the original version proposed by Masaaki Osumi way back in the beginning and the newer, more light-hearted version. In order to achieve this, Aoki proposed 3 different character designs for Lupin: a hard, soft, and comical version of Lupin. This way, they could easily change his style based on if they wanted a certain episode to be more like Osumi's version, or if they wanted it to be more like Miyazaki and Takahata's version. However, later in the series, they would change the character designs to be more cartoonish. Because of this decision, the actual design of the characters would vary a lot from episode to episode, and could even change drastically in the same episode. Now, this part of Lupin is part of what is known as the Pink Jacket series. He also uses the pink jacket in the 1985 movie Legend of the Gold of Babylon and the 2023 ONA Lupin III vs. Cat's Eye. Also, allow me to just slip this in here really quick. How the hell did it take all the way up until 2023 before we got an anime collaboration between Lupin and Cat's Eye? To me, that just seems like the most no-brainer collaboration of all time. Anyways, for a lot of people, Pink Jacket Lupin is often considered the weakest entry in the Lupin franchise. A lot of this has to do with the poor animation, lack of unfinished style, and some more goofy plot. There was also an homage to Part 3 created in Part 5 in the form of Episode 6, which has Lupin try to crack an uncrackable safe. The reason it's uncrackable is because only idiots with 1 IQ can open it, and the safe is literally unbreakable. Now, allow me to insert my own opinion here. To me, that episode felt like complete garbage and was a massive dent in an otherwise pretty good show. And that is pretty much how Part 3 can feel. It's a rough watch. I wouldn't really recommend it to people unless you really want to watch all of Lupin. It is by many considered the weakest entry in the mainline Lupin series, and I think it's fairly easy to understand why. The animation isn't the greatest, and while it sounds great on paper that the animators were given a lot of freedom to do things in their own style, it also makes things feel even less polished, since entire designs can change, not just over the span of several episodes, but even within the same episode. Part 3 is also more goofy and ridiculous than a lot of other main series Lupin, but hey, don't let me tell you what to do. Maybe the more silly style of Lupin is more up your alley. The music for Part 3 was once again composed by Yuji Ono. The opening and ending themes for this part would be changed to the more city pop-esque Sexy Adventure performed by Yusuke Nakamura, and the ending Fairy Night performed by Sonia Rosa. Very fitting since this came out in the 80s, while the popularity of city pop was at its peak. The voice cast for this part would be the first time in the main series history so far where none of the main characters' voices would be replaced. However, sadly, this would be the last time that Yasuo Yamada, Eiko Masayama, and Goro Naya would voice Lupin, Fujiko, and Senigata in a main series ever again. Yasuo Yamada passed away in 1995. He collapsed in his home due to a brain hemorrhage and would later pass away at the hospital, aged 62. Eiko Masayama would retire from voice acting before the release of another main Lupin series, with her last anime performance being for Rerere no Tensai Bakabon in 1999. Goro Naya would also not return for another main series performance after Part 3, however he would still continue to voice act in other works up until 2012. Naya passed away in 2013, aged 83. Now, despite the fact that we got a third main part out of Lupin in the mid-80s, it would take another 30 whole years until we would see Part 4. That doesn't mean that there was no Lupin in the meantime. There were still several specials that were released from the late 80s all the way up until 2015. These included Lupin entries such as The Fuma Conspiracy, 1987, Bye Bye Lady Liberty, 1989, Farewell to Nostradamus, 1995, Dead or Alive, 1996, Walther P38, 1997, Episode 0, The First Contact, 2002, The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, 2012, and even Jigen's Gravestone, 2014, just to name a few. There were new movies and specials released pretty much every year, totaling up to 34 releases until we got a new main part. So it's not like there was no Lupin between the end of Part 3 until the start of Part 4. For Lupin III Part 4, otherwise known as the Italian Adventure, certain things have changed. Firstly, the studio now responsible for making Lupin was Telecom Animation Film, which is a subsidiary of TMS Entertainment, formerly known as Tokyo Movie. Secondly, this part of Lupin was no longer directly based on Monkey Punch's original manga. As a matter of fact, there is a manga adaptation of the anime by Naoya Hayakawa in the form of Lupin III 2015 that was published alongside the anime. The job of director for Part 4 was given to Kazuhide Tomonaga and Yuichiro Yano, with Tomonaga serving as chief director on the project. For this, most of the story takes place in Italy and San Marino, as well as certain episodes being set in other places like France or Japan. Part 4 also had a special release in that it was first released on the free-to-air TV channel Italia Uno in Italy before it even started airing in Japan. In this series, Lupin can be seen wearing a blue jacket, which is more of a staple of newer Lupin works. Notably, he also wears the blue jacket in Part 5, as well as the Takeshi Koike trilogy of films, Jigen's Gravestone, Goemon's Blood Spray, and Fujiko's Lie. Now, Part 4 is the first of the modern takes on Lupin. It's a bit of a combination of the different eras of Lupin. The idea behind it is kind of similar to what they attempted to do with Part 3, but with better animation. As of the writing of the script, I haven't really seen much of Part 4, so I can't exactly say much about how good it is, but I can say this. If you are someone who is only interested in getting into Lupin and don't really want to go back and watch the old series, then Part 4 is a good starting point. It both gives you a taste of all the different styles of Lupin, while also introducing certain characters that you will see again in Part 5. The music for the fourth main part of Lupin was still done by Yuji Ono for the Japanese version, while the international version had music done by Papik. The opening theme this time was performed by Yo and the Explosion Band, which is a band formed by Yuji Ono back in 1977, and once again saw the reintroduction of the Lupin theme as the opening to a mainline Lupin series. In order to make the opening fit the setting, they also added a mandolin to give it that exotic feel and instantly remind you of Italy. The ending is performed by Enka singer Sayuri Ishikawa with lyrics written by Tsunku, real name Mitsuo Terada. As far as the voice cast is concerned, there was once again major changes to the voice cast, which is not surprising considering it's been 30 years since the last time we had a main series release. However, it should be noted that Kiyoshi Kobayashi still took on the role as Jigen Daisuke, making him the only original voice left in the series at this point in time. As far as new voice actors are concerned though, Kanichi Kurita took over as the voice of Lupin, Miyuki Sawashiro got the role of Fujiko, Daisuke Namikawa took over as Goemon, and Koichi Yamadera was the new voice of Senigata. There's also a bit of a funny story behind how Kurita ended up getting the role. So Kurita, who is an impressionist and comedian as well as being a voice actor, was actually friends with previous Lupin voice Yasuo Yamada. While Yamada was in hospital, the production staff approached Kurita to take on the role of Lupin for the film Farewell to Nostradamus. The reason he was approached was because Kurita had done impressions of Lupin, was a friend of Yamada's, and production staff felt that he would not ruin the image of the character. They managed to convince him to take the job since he only had to do a little bit of voice acting. But as it turned out, he actually had to record all of Lupin's lines since there had been no voice recording at all at that point. So Kurita had to struggle with playing the character despite having no theatrical background, unlike Yamada. After Yamada passed away, staff wanted Kurita to take on the role completely, something that Kurita was unwilling to do at first, but eventually the staff managed to change his mind. Though, in order to do so, they had to go so far as to even follow him to the bullet train where he was headed to another job. So yeah, that's basically how Kurita ended up getting the role and his debut as a voice actor. It wasn't all smooth sailing either, since Kurita would face a lot of criticism since he wouldn't so much voice act Lupin, but instead tried to imitate Yamada's Lupin voice. But as he gained more experience, he would start changing his voice acting style to allow for a more personal approach to the character. But anyways, I digress. Let's move on to part 5. Luckily, we didn't have to wait another 30 years for another main part of Lupin, because in 2018, only 3 years after part 4, we got another main Lupin series in the form of part 5, also known as The Misadventures in France. This time, the series would be mostly set in France, and the show would be directed by Yuichiro Yano, who also worked as director on part 4, and a bunch of episode directors would also be brought on to put their own spin on the individual episodes. The show would still be produced by Telecom Animation Film. Some of the recurring themes of this series was to focus on modern times and high technology, AI, facial recognition software, surveillance drones, or even the dark web are on full display in this part, showing us that even the gentleman thief has to adapt to change and modern society, although Jigen is still showing a lack of willingness to change and adapt. Part 5 contains 4 major story arcs, simply referred to as episode 1 through 4. The first arc is set in modern-day France and follows Lupin as he infiltrates a data center to steal digital currency from Marco Polo, which is a dark website that deals in illegal items such as weapons and drugs. They also meet a new character, the prodigal teenage hacker Ami Ena. In the second arc, Lupin gets possession of a black notebook containing sensitive information about high-ranking political figures. This makes him a target of the Directorate General for External Security. But more importantly, it also makes Lupin a target for Albert de Andrécy, who is not only extremely cunning, but also a former partner of Lupin, who is now pretending to be an honest government official. In the third arc, Lupin tries to steal the national treasure of the Kingdom of Padar, known as the Bloody Teardrop. The treasure is currently in the possession of Princess Dolma, who has befriended Ami while they attended the same school. However, a sudden revolution in Padar threatens Princess Dolma's life, and Nami teams up with Lupin to try to save her. The fourth and final arc of Part 5 sees Lupin and Nami once again team up to take on the evil IT conglomerate Shake Hands Corporation. And just like real IT companies, their goal is world domination through a monopoly on cyber trafficking and internet use. What? No trying to stop people from using adblock? Now, Part 5 is for me the series that really goes all in on being the modern Lupin. No, I'm not just saying that because it features the internet and modern or futuristic gadgets. I'm saying that because there is quite literally a theme of change and how you either change with the times or you fight against it. Lupin doesn't mind change and is always willing to embrace new technology. However, Jigen is way more set in his ways, still refusing to change out his Smith & Wesson Model 19 for newer guns. Part 5 also embraces the idea of story arcs that we haven't really seen in any other main series Lupin before. The majority of the show is actually made up of multiple episode story arcs, with only 7 of the 24 episodes being episodic. Those episodes also serve as homages to previous Lupin works, and Lupin changes his jacket color to correspond to what type of Lupin it is an homage to. All in all, Part 5 is an excellent show, and in my opinion, the best of the 3 modern mainline Lupin series. The music for Part 5 was done by Yuji Ono and the Lupin III, and since Part 5 is mostly set in France, the opening was given a bit of a French twist in the style of Musette. Part 5 also retains the same voice cast for its major characters as Part 4 did, making this the first time in a mainline Lupin series where there were no changes to the characters. And yes, that also means that Kiyoshi Kobayashi would still be active as the last original voice cast of the series. However, Part 5 would also be the last mainline series that he would voice in. Lupin did, however, lose the most important reason for its very existence in 2019, as author Kazuhiko Kato, also known as Monkey Punch, would pass away due to pneumonia at the age of 81. And of course, only 3 years later, we would get Part 6. As of the making of this video, the final main entry in the Lupin series. For this part, TMS Entertainment would once again resume control over the production of the series. Eiji Suganuma was given the task of directing the show. This time, the series would be mainly set in Great Britain and feature characters such as Sherlock Holmes. Part 6 takes on a bit more of a traditional role as it pits Lupin against Holmes, as Lupin is suspected of having killed Holmes' partner, Dr. Watson. Kinda funny how we got here, from Monkey Punch almost being sued by the LeBlanc estate for copyright infringement all the way back in the beginning, and now with Part 6 they release something that almost feels like a direct reference to Maurice LeBlanc's Arsène Lupin vs. Sherlock Holmes, which coincidentally also had copyright issues. Anyways, the writing for Part 6 was done by Takahiro Okura for the first 12 episodes and Shigeru Murakoshi for the remaining 12. The series would also feature scripts from guest writers such as Mamoru Oshii, the guy behind the 1995 movie Ghost in the Shell. Part 6 once again sees Lupin don the green jacket that he used originally in Part 1. The reason for that is that Part 6 was created to celebrate 50 years since the airing of Part 1, and thus the green jacket signals that Lupin will return to his roots, and that the show will be darker in tone. Same as Part 5, this new series mixes an overarching story with more episodic episodes. But since this show features a lot of guest writers, including Mamoru Oshii, Taku Ashibe, and many more, the overall feel of the show can change a lot from episode to episode. Now, it's not necessarily bad, but it's definitely not my favorite Lupin series. The music for this series was once again done by Yuji Ono and the Lupin III, and it is the usual music that we know and love. However, it's once again changed to fit the setting, and since this series is set in England, they gave the opening in particular a really nice British rock music vibe, adding distorted electric guitars to the usual sax and other instruments that we normally find in the usual Lupin theme, giving it a refreshing new feel. As far as the voice cast is concerned for Part 6, there were no changes to most of the cast. However, one voice would shine with its absence. That was the voice of Kiyoshi Kobayashi as Jigen. For Part 6, he was replaced by Akio Otsuka, who is the son of the former Senigata and Goemon voice actor, Chikao Otsuka, but not without giving Kobayashi his last send-off. Before Part 6, a special called Part 6 Jidai was released. This would be Kobayashi's last time voicing Jigen, and the whole episode would basically just be dedicated to Jigen as a character and how he was unsure if he can change with the times. It's honestly a really nice touch, and puts a very nice end to Kiyoshi Kobayashi's 52 years. Yes, you heard that right. 52 years as Jigen's voice. Sadly, that now means that there are no original voices left in the series. But it's also been over 50 years since the start of this series. We all knew that this would happen eventually, as long as Lupin plans to keep going. But stepping down as the voice of Jigen did not mean that he was going to stop voice acting. He would keep appearing in other productions until he died in 2022, age 89. Rest in peace to an absolute industry legend. So, before we end things off, we also quickly have to talk a bit about some of the more notable Lupin specials and spin-offs that have come out over the course of this franchise's existence. And to start, I feel like it's only right to talk about the 1978 movie, The Secret of Mamo. This movie is significant because it was TMS's first full-length feature production. It was also an attempt at making a Lupin that was more like the original manga, something that they really couldn't do for the TV series due to censorship standards at the time. So because of that, they made a wacky tale that included Lupin's execution, the Philosopher's Stone, a mysterious billionaire, immortality, and even mythology and sci-fi, all wrapped up into a Lupin mystery. Now, I would be lying if I said that this movie wasn't a lot to take in, but that's kind of the charm of it. Lupin can get very weird, but all in all, the movie is a lot of fun and works as something quite different to break up the normal Lupin formula that is often present in Part 2, especially, and also later works. Secondly, I feel like it's only proper to talk about Hayao Miyazaki's Castle of Cagliostro. So, Lupin III: The Castle of Cagliostro is a 100-minute-long movie from 1979 based on Lupin III. There are multiple reasons why this movie is significant. For one, it was the directorial debut of Hayao Miyazaki, if we ignore his work as director for the unreleased 1972 pilot Yuki's Son, which I'm pretty sure we all do. Now, I'm sure I don't need to explain to you who Miyazaki is or why his full directorial debut is significant, but to keep it short, he would go on to be one of the founders of Studio Ghibli, basically Japan's Disney, and is by many considered one of anime's best filmmakers. Secondly, it really gave us a proper look at Miyazaki's Lupin. You see, Cagliostro's Lupin is quite different to that of Monkey Punch's original character, and Masaki also made his take on that character. For example, Miyazaki made his character more cheery and happy, as well as making Lupin into more of a hero-type character. A huge contrast to the original Lupin, who was much more scheming and liked driving expensive cars like the Mercedes-Benz SSK because it was Hitler's favorite car. Or completely removing the sexual themes and erotic elements around Fujiko Mine. Basically, it's safe to say that Miyazaki's Lupin had much broader appeal. The most important thing about this movie is that it's just good. Whether you're a fan of Lupin or Miyazaki, there's a lot to love about Castle of Cagliostro. The third spin-off worth noting is actually more than one, but I feel like you might as well include them all as one entry. And those are the modern takes on Lupin by Sayo Yamamoto and Takeshi Koike. I'm of course talking about the 2012 TV series, The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, and the three movies, Jigen's Gravestone, Goemon's Blood Spray, and Fujiko Mine's Lie. The reason why these are significant are because they were attempts at bringing back the darker tone of Lupin that was removed from the main series way back in Part 1. That's why these takes are a lot more mature, including themes like nudity, sexuality, murder, gore, and drugs, among other things. These are definitely not for everyone, but for those that like their darker and more adult takes on Lupin, these are definitely worth the watch. And the last one I feel like we should highlight is also a modern take on Lupin, and that is the 2019 movie Lupin III: The First. This is significant because it's the first feature-length Lupin movie to be made in full CG. Now, I know to a lot of people that idea doesn't necessarily sound all that appealing. However, the CG in this movie is definitely a lot better than your standard anime CG. It was produced by Marsa Animation Planet together with TMS Entertainment and takes us back in time to the 1960s as we are once again reunited with Red Jacket Lupin and his battle against the Nazis. This movie is honestly very well made and I would highly recommend it. I mean, I did make a video about it previously. The animation is really good, and the CG style is honestly very fitting. Lupin does look a little weird, but that's because it becomes a lot more apparent that he kinda looks like a monkey, which is entirely on purpose. It just looks a little bit more jarring in CG. So yeah, that was Lupin III, all the way from the manga back in the 60s, and all the way up until today. This show has experienced a lot of changes over the years, and not always good ones either, but despite everything, it has somehow managed to stick around for over 50 years. And it is perhaps even because of some of those issues when it comes to identity that Lupin has been able to stick around, because it gave us multiple versions of our favorite gentleman thief that all have somewhat unique styles to them, while still maintaining that core that makes this show an enjoyable watch, and that makes us want to come back and see what kind of trouble Lupin and the gang is getting into this time. To me, Lupin III is the best formulaic anime out there. Sounds weird since normally you wouldn't say that it's good to be formulaic, but for Lupin, it simply works. Now, one thing I haven't really touched on here is the potential ending to the series, because logically, that would have to happen at some point. And with the passing of Kazuhiko Kato, you start feeling like the time might be nearing for an end to this series. And in regards to that, I would like to leave you all with a comment from Monkey Punch himself, in regards to the end of the series. According to the author, he believes that the story of Lupin III can never end. But if it one day has to end, there's only 3 ways it can go. Either Lupin and Senigata both have to fail, or they both have to win. And the third way is that they both grow old.